When it came time to have a second round of nominations for the New Commons Project, I debated for a while about what I wanted to volunteer as tribute. I'd loved the programming and discussions around The Wire, The Simpsons, The Canoe, and more, but I felt like there was a significant hole in what had been studied so far. So much of my life is covered by things like video games, board games, fantasy books, and science fiction. If the New Commons was supposed to be about things that belong to all of us, and that are important in the here and now, what could represent these aspects of my life? Too often it feels like the fun things aren't studied nearly enough, and in today's world of social distancing and face masks, studying something purely fun seems that much more important. This isn't to say that The Simpsons isn't any fun, but it's a very specific kind of fun. I wanted something that covered a much wider range. As I thought over all the different possibilities, it occurred to me that almost all of them have a common ancestor. From my linguistics background, they all could be related in much the same way Indo-European languages connect. In today's video games, you get to play a pivotal part of the action. Whether it's sneaking behind enemy lines to complete spy missions in Metal Gear Solid, or leading a group of adventurers to save the world in Final Fantasy, or just taking on the legions of hell in the Diablo franchise. And then there are board games, which have, thankfully, broken free of the bonds of the iron fist of Monopoly, to instead explore seemingly infinite spaces, settling new lands in Catan, building a railroad empire in Ticket to Ride, or making the best fireworks display ever in Hanabi. The rise of fantasy and science fiction in print is also well documented, with roots going all the way back to Homer that extend through Tolkien and on into the Star Wars series or Game of Thrones. But in many ways, the explosion of these seemingly different forms of media can be attributed to one simple switch: the act of making media interactive instead of just something you're spoon-fed. In my opinion, nothing sums that up better than the phenomenon of role-playing games, and the granddaddy of them all has got to be Dungeons & Dragons. Before I continue much further into this discussion, I have to have a moment of full disclosure here. While I have played campaigns using 4 or 5 different rule sets, I don't consider myself to be an expert in traditional RPGs at all. Of course, when I say that, I realize I sound a fair bit like my wife, who speaks 6 languages but always throws out a disclaimer when asked, explaining that she's really only fluent in 3, maybe 2. To anyone who speaks only one language, having a fair mastery of the ins and outs of vocabulary and syntax in any other language can seem like a momentous feat. But to someone who's well versed in languages, it's much easier to dismiss it. Likewise, if you've never picked up a die with more than 6 sides, having someone say they've played games not just using the rule set of Dungeons & Dragons, but 3 or 4 others as well, can make it sound like they are, indeed, an expert. But to anyone who's a real RPG aficionado, it's easy to tell if someone hasn't really done any deep dives in those rule sets. I don't want to lose any credibility by trying to claim to be something I'm not. Do I still feel like I'm able to talk about this topic? You betcha. I definitely consider myself to be a jack of all trades when it comes to geekery. I have a Magic the Gathering collection that takes up 2 card catalogs at home. I watch far more movies and television shows than I probably ought to, and I've gotten paid to write fantasy and science fiction books. Personally, I think once you're a card-carrying author of fantasy books, you're about as deep into geekdom as you can get. I don't look at that as a scarlet letter. I view it as a badge of honor. But all of this is just to say that yes, I have a fair idea about what I'm talking about. Now that my street cred is no longer under threat, where was I? All right, role-playing games. At this point, my presentation gets tricky. You see, some of you are already deeply entrenched in the ins and outs of RPGs, and so you would just want me to delve into other parts of my presentation. But there are others of you who may be only vaguely familiar with RPGs. You know they involve dice and math, with a side hobby of maybe getting stuffed in a locker if you're unlucky. I can't really ignore one of you at the expense of the other, but I can make it so this presentation is tailor-made for you. That's what role-playing games are all about, after all, right? So, how would you respond to the following question? I say Thaco, you say... Okay, so you don't really know the ins and outs of role-playing games. There are a ton of resources available to you online to explain those, but since you're already here, let me give you a brief overview. I've identified a number of key characteristics using Dungeons & Dragons as a template. In an RPG, a group of players, anywhere from 2 to 6 or more, gather together to participate in a shared storytelling session. The exact rules of the game may vary, and they're often tweaked depending on what the players want to get out of the game. There's always a dungeon master, a person in charge of setting the stage for the story, defining the goals and objectives, and keeping it moving along. But within that broad framework, just about anything is possible. For example, one game might be focused solely on winning. The players want to go into the dungeon, find all the treasure, kill all the monsters, and make their characters even stronger. Perhaps these players are totally focused on the rule set. They care about the different moves their characters have available to them, and they look to use those rules to outthink any puzzles or obstacles the dungeon master might have put in their place. On the other hand, another game might be focused mainly on the story itself. Fighting and dice rolling might enter into it, but the players or dungeon master really care more about making something cool happen. The rules are there to keep the absolutely ridiculous from taking place, but within those rules, characters are allowed a great deal of freedom to do whatever they think they could reasonably accomplish. Of course, some of this also depends on the dungeon master running the game. Players will often ask if they can perform an action, or at least attempt to. The DM can consider the request and either say it's impossible or give them some sort of a skill check to pass to see if they can do it. If they have to roll an 18 or higher on a 20-sided die, the DM is basically saying there's almost no chance they'll be able to do that action. On the other hand, if they just need to get a 2 or higher, then it looks quite likely they'll succeed. When a game is really working on all levels, the players and the DM act almost as a team as they explore the story the DM has thought up for the characters and work together to find out how it ends. So you're up to speed about role-playing games. Good. But I have to stress that RPGs aren't strictly about stories. The rule sets really do enable the game to feel much more interactive. Without those rules, there's no real challenge to be faced. This works on 2 levels. Say our intrepid group of adventurers have battled their way deep into the darkest recesses of an eternal dungeon. Finally, they meet the legendary demon at its heart. Without a rule set, the DM could simply say the demon takes one look at the adventurers and vaporizes them with a blink. Conversely, the players could also say they cause a massive rockfall to crush the demon without further ado. Working within the constraints of the story and the world make for a more compelling experience. This observation leads me to one of my main points today. I'm a librarian by day, but on the side I write fantasy novels. I might not be as prolific as some, but I've had many a conversation with some of the biggest names in the industry around writing. And when I set out to write a book, I use the same techniques the DM and the RPG players use when they set out to run a campaign. In fact, I'd argue that a novel is, in many ways, like a pre-written role-playing game. As the author, I DM the characters through the conflicts. The readers evaluate the story based on how well it's executed. Take Lord of the Rings, for example. Tolkien devoted years to setting up the backstory and setting of his novels. Through the course of the story, he focuses less on the rule set and more on the story itself. It's a common critique of the books that the Eagles should have just carried Frodo straight to Mount Doom and ended everything that much more easily. However, I'll say that it's very easy to armchair quarterback a novel. You could just as simply say Gandalf should have beaten the Balrog by not falling off the bridge. In other words, it's simple to narrate your way into or out of pretty much any plot point you find yourself in. What makes a novel successful is its author's ability to narrate that path effectively. If the Eagles took the Fellowship to Mordor and Legolas held off an army of orcs single-handedly, giving the rest enough time to run in, chuck in the ring, and run out, would the story have been as good? Would you have liked it as much? Let's get out of fantasy for a minute and turn this same theory towards something less blatantly RPG-y. How about Romeo and Juliet? You don't think of Shakespeare as a dungeon master, but isn't that essentially what he's doing when he's setting up the conflict? 2 star-crossed lovers, each from a warring family, destined to die by the story's end? It would be pretty easy for Shakespeare to solve the tragedy at the end of the story. All he had to do was have Romeo and Juliet actually know what the whole plan was and then act accordingly. But stories aren't always about min-maxing the rule set. They're about making the best art you can. The best stories don't always have a happy ending after all, and true, Romeo could have just revealed himself to be an expert swordsman and chopped his way through every Capulet he could find, but that wouldn't really result in a satisfying ending for most people, although it might make for an excellent spoof. Maybe if RPGs had first been described as interactive storytelling, they might have had a better reception with the public at large. Then again, interactive storytelling doesn't exactly sound like something that's going to sell a lot of products, so maybe Dungeons & Dragons was a much better way to introduce that concept to the masses. Either way, role-playing games have not always been widely embraced. In fact, at first, there were many conservatives who viewed them as a gateway to devil worship. In 1982, in his first starring role, Tom Hanks played the lead in Mazes and Monsters, a movie where the main character breaks with reality due to an RPG. He ultimately believes he's living inside his imagined game. He stabs a mugger and becomes suicidal before his friends finally manage to save him, although even they can't convince him to come back to sanity. Parents in the late 70s and early 80s were warned of the evils of the game and cautioned against letting their children play it. Real-life instances were identified where people followed the Tom Hanks route, supposedly, having mental breakdowns due to losing themselves in a fantasy. Of course, this suspicion of RPGs and the insistence by the general public on keeping it at arm's length reminds me of a similar pattern that seems to crop up whenever something new is taking the world by storm. During my days in college studying literature, I remember reading about how people had viewed novels as seedy and potentially corruptive. Just look at Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey, where Catherine's reading of Gothic novels leads her to see murders where none exist. Of course, Austen was herself critiquing the argument of her day that too much reading could corrupt susceptible women. But how far off is that from the argument that Tom Hanks is going to start murdering people the second he picks up a 20-sided die? Look at the other new forms of art: movies, cartoons, video games, graphic novels, virtual reality. There's a transitory time where the status quo seems to want to fight back against what it sees as an affront to the way things are. There's a similar lag that often occurs in academia, where the popular can't really be viewed as art until it's been properly aged by a few decades. That said, RPGs didn't make the process any easier on itself, in large part due to how inaccessible the rules tended to be at first. Thankfully, role-playing games have come a long way since the first edition of Dungeons & Dragons. That early version had many things in it that were, frankly, baffling for most players. Much of those initial editions of the rules were focused on statistical charts to the point that many non-fans would easily go cross-eyed trying to keep track of it all. If you're not well steeped in the history of RPGs and you want to cure a bad case of insomnia, try to get an RPG fan to explain to you the ins and outs of THAC0 sometime. You'll be snoozing in no time. But from those days of statistical tables and die roll after die roll, RPGs have branched out and flourished. Don't get me wrong, there are still rule sets out there that would make a trained statistician start scratching their head. But they've now been joined by other platforms that allow for a much broader range of rule implementation, to the point where you have games where you don't roll a die at all. If RPGs stayed in the world of pen and paper, however, they might not have made my personal cut for New Commons nominee. But since Dungeons & Dragons first broke into the scene, role-playing games have made huge strides into practically every corner of our media. There are straight-up digital adaptations of them, whether open-ended affairs like Neverwinter Nights or pre-scripted versions of a D&D module. The Baldur's Gate series is a prime example of those. There are numerous novels set in some of the realms the Dungeons & Dragons game occupies. R.A. Salvatore's Drizzt Do'Urden series and Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman's Dragonlance Chronicles are still coming out with new entries, decades after they began. But even setting aside the literal adaptations of the Dungeons & Dragons rule set, it's seeped into many other areas. Video games perhaps make the easiest comparison, as designers took the constraints of character building and storylines and inserted them into their media to make them that much more compelling. These games are far beyond the days of Super Mario Bros. Or Sonic, with the hugely popular, massively multi-online role-playing game World of Warcraft leading the way. These days, character creation is something that can happen in games that don't even really feel like RPGs. Football or soccer games, or Mii's on the Nintendo platform. When you get down to it, I'd argue that fantasy sports is much closer to RPGs than the fantasy sports players would be comfortable admitting. You create a team, drafting them from real-life teams, and you follow stats and storylines just as much as you would fighting your way through the Underdark in a Forgotten Realms campaign. RPGs are everywhere. They're a part of our culture and society, and because of their open-endedness, they invite continual innovation and participation. What's the definition of a commons, according to the New Commons Project? A commons is something that belongs to all of us, a communally held resource from which no one can be excluded and for which we are all responsible. How could Dungeons & Dragons not be a part of this conversation? I think one big reason might be due to the fact that time and time again role-playing games have been misunderstood and misconstrued by those who don't understand them. A prime example of this can be found in the way Hollywood kept trying to tap into the Dungeons & Dragons market. I remember excitedly going into the theaters to watch the movie Dungeons & Dragons back in 2000. These days, I would have checked out its IMDb rating, 3.6, before I went, and it would have saved me some time and the price of a ticket. It had dungeons, and it definitely had dragons. It had plenty of magic effects and evil wizards. But it didn't have a coherent plot, and it bombed at the box office. Take a look at the trailer.
In a faraway world,
all people deserve to be free and equal.
The child is not fit to govern an empire.
the forces of darkness
You can control dragons.
with the dragon army at my command. I can crush the Empress.
This has got to be some twisted magic experiment gone seriously wrong.
Have threatened to conquer a kingdom.
What can I do to stop Profion?
If you can obtain the Rod of Savril, you could control red dragons.
I suggest we lay low, let the whole thing blow over, come back, rob everybody.
There's one small problem.
Problem?
I kind of committed us to find it.
Let their blood rain from the sky!
Trust me.
I hate when you say that. Don't touch that.
Kill them slowly.
You finish the maze, you win the prize.
You'll have to do better than that.
They must complete this task alone.
You know, I love the way you track. I'll get Marina, you get the map. How you get the girl and I get a map? We gotta work out some new plans. I want them found.
Do you really think you can steal my destiny?
Be careful.
You too.
Now is your time to die.
Dungeons and Dragons.
You want to play, do you?
It's hard for me to believe that back when I first saw that trailer, I thought to myself, that looks like a movie I want to see. I hope it's good. And yet I did. Some of that might be because I was 22 at the time. Some of it might be because I was just that desperate for a good adaptation of a genre that I loved. For decades, fantasy fans had been like Charlie Brown facing Lucy's place kick holding abilities. Yes, there were occasional tastes of something that was actually good, but by and large, we'd run up and whiff on kick after kick. What changed? Just 1 year later, Peter Jackson's Fellowship of the Ring came out, showing Hollywood what could be done when actual fans made fantasy films. Here's the first trailer that came out for it.
Legend tells of a ring created by an ancient evil that gave its wearer the power to enslave the world. Believed lost for centuries, it has now been found.
Is it secret? Is it safe?
This is the One Ring, forged by the Dark Lord Sauron. Sauron needs only this ring to cover all the lands of a second darkness. He's seeking it. Seeking it all. His thought is bent on it.
No one knows it's here, do they? Do they, Gandalf?
The weapon of the enemy is a gift. Let us use it against him.
You cannot wield it.
None of us can.
The ring must be destroyed.
It was made in the fires of Mount Doom. Only there can it be unmade.
I know what I must do, but I'm afraid to do it.
One does not simply walk into Mordor.
There is no other way.
Again, these two movies came out just a year apart. I remember vividly sitting in the theater before Fellowship started on opening night, hoping against hope that it wouldn't be another Dungeons & Dragons. Thankfully, it wasn't. The Dungeons & Dragons adaptation looked at the game and thought it was all about the trappings, the literal dungeons and the literal dragons. But to participants, it's much more than that. It's the shared experience of a group of friends coming together to make a unique story all their own. Even if everyone starts out with the same premise and the same rules and the same characters with the same abilities, the story will be different for each group, because the choices they make and the results of these choices will always change. That's the appeal more than anything else, and it's the same sort of creativity I tap into when I write a new novel. RPGers don't view themselves as the Jeremy Irons flavor of films. They view themselves as Peter Jackson. And when you can see the game from that point of view, it's much easier to treat seriously and eventually become a fan. This scene from Freaks and Geeks really captures that.
Tonight's D&D campaign is going to be the best ever. 2 words, Ancient Babylonia.
Have you guys seen the drawing of the goddess Ishtar? Hubba, hubba.
You should look at the goddess of Vice. You can see her butt.
I just hope you guys are ready to face the dancing sword.
Bring it on.
Yeah.
What's a dancing sword?
Well, it's like...
It's a sword that can fight without you holding it.
What, you just send your sword into battle for you and then you stay home? It's kind of stupid.
No, you have to be at least 3 inches away from it when it's fighting. That way you can fight 2 people at once.
It's kind of cool.
Hey, Daniel. We're playing D&D tonight. You want to come?
Why?
I think you'd like it. We could show you how to play.
I couldn't do that.
Yeah, you wouldn't like it anyway. It's really boring.
No, it isn't, Neil. You love it. We sit around and crack jokes and eat junk food all night while we're fighting dragons and saving princesses and stuff. It's pretty fun.
And the best part is, you get to pretend to be somebody you can't be in real life.
Okay, I'll play.
Really?
Yeah, I'll play. Just don't expect me to be good at it or anything.
You can't possibly be any worse than Bill.
Hey.
So, Sam, how about you? Are you in?
Yeah, I guess.
I thought you were too cool to play. Logan the Huge.
So what do I do?
First, you have to create a character. Roll your dice and find out what your ability scores are.
What are those?
Oh, well, that tells you if you're strong or smart or how good you are with a weapon.
What are you, some super smart guy?
Oh, I don't have a character. I'm the dungeon master. I control the game and act out all the characters you meet along the way.
And Daniel, watch out for him. He's sneaky.
Yeah, he thinks being the dungeon master gives him the license to mess with our heads.
Oh, I'm sorry. Perhaps I should let you encounter kittens and grandmas so as not to upset you.
Come on, Daniel, roll the dice. I want to see what your character's gonna be.
All right. Here goes nothing. A dwarf? I don't want to be a dwarf. I want to be like a ninja or a fighter.
Well, dwarves are fighters. They're really good at it.
Are you a dwarf?
No. I'm Kraganwar the Destroyer.
You're lucky, man. I want to be some huge destroyer guy.
Dwarves can do a lot of things that huge guys can't do.
It's true. Take it from me.
Yeah, dwarves are really tough. They're good at finding jewels.
All right, fine. I'll be a dwarf. But my name is Carlos.
Carlos the dwarf?
Yeah, you got a problem with that, Gorthon?
No.
I'm just joking.
Check out the wheels of burning. You know we won't stop. We got the spoiler burning. We're keeping it hot. So grab your...
Greetings, princess. It is I, Carlos the dwarf. The dragon has been slain, and you're free to rule your kingdom.
Well, congratulations, Daniel. You just finished your first Dungeons & Dragons campaign.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Hey, this is really fun. You guys want to do this tomorrow night?
Sure.
Yeah.
I would, if Harris killed me again.
Oh.
You had it coming, Bill.
We'll kick his ass tomorrow night, Bill. Just leave it to Carlos.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get another drink. You guys want anything?
No.
Gordon? Bill? Alright.
Wow, he's cool.
Yeah. Does him wanting to play with us again mean that he's turning into a geek? Or we're turning into cool guys?
I don't know. I'm gonna go for us being cool guys.
Yeah, I'll buy that.
Yeah, definitely cool guys.
Cool.
So what does all this matter? I know sometimes all this academia can seem sort of pointless to people who aren't on a college campus each day. And if people question the need for studying Shakespeare or Descartes, I imagine they might really begin to holler when we start holding up role-playing games as something worthy of study. It's a bunch of nerds rolling dice. How in the world might it connect to anything that really matters? Setting aside the rest of the argument, which falls outside the scope of my talk and would require too much time to really rebut, I wanted to provide one very recent example of a way in which role-playing games have impacted our lives and our country. Remember January 6th, when rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol building? What if I were to tell you much of what inspired those rioters could be traced back to role-playing games? Allow me to explain. Many people have been comparing QAnon to augmented reality games months before the attack on the Capitol. QAnon, of course, was the online-based group who were convinced the world was being run by a cabal of pedophiles in Hollywood and D.C. They believed Donald Trump would lead a movement to violently overthrow that cabal. This might sound like something straight out of a bad comic book, but this same movement inspired many to take real-life actions to stop these nefarious pedophiles. Famously, one man attacked a Comet ping-pong pizza shop in D.C. back in 2016, convinced that a pedophile ring was being run by the Democrats in the restaurant's basement. So it's not like there wasn't precedent for online rumors to spur people to action. In a typical augmented reality game, clues are given out bit by bit, inspiring players to crack the clues and go to find the next step of the puzzle. The movie and film Ready Player One describes one such ARG. It's all fun and games when it's created ahead of time and there's a surprise at the end, but with QAnon, participants were told the government was corrupt, and it was up to them to decipher clues dropped by the anonymous Q that would lead them to the center of that corruption. For a long time, I used to play a segment from the Colbert Report, where Stephen Colbert would talk about Wikipedia, highlighting how the platform could allow people to agree on their own reality. He called it a wikiality, and that word resonated with me as I watched Donald Trump tell his supporters the election was rigged, and then cited the fact that many people believed his claims as a reason for why those claims had to be taken seriously. Bit by bit, Trump led his supporters deeper into this fantasy world, encouraging them to ignore mountains of evidence of fake news and instead buy into the wikiality he was creating. All that was left to do was substitute reality with the new construction, which is what many of those rioters wanted to do on January 6th. Perhaps by better understanding RPGs and the games they have inspired, we can better prepare ourselves to combat other such attacks on reality in the future. But role-playing games don't just have to be important because they can explain national emergencies. They can also help us deal with other worldwide catastrophes. In the middle of the pandemic, many people have discovered that the things you used to be able to do around a table with a group of friends can now just as easily be done in a Zoom meeting around a virtual platform. In fact, it's even easier in many ways. With everyone having their own screen and the Dungeon Master having access to pre-made maps and graphics, let alone platforms like Tabletop Simulator or Roll20 or Dungeons & Dragons Beyond, each of which facilitates the ins and outs of keeping track of rules and abilities and stats. One of my friends picked up a well-paying job as a paid DM for online groups, as RPGs got even more attention during social distancing. I think it's very telling that one of the most popular video games of the pandemic was Animal Crossing on the Nintendo Switch. If you're not familiar with the game, it's about as tame a fare as you can imagine. You play a new villager on an island, and it's all about making a house, inviting friends to the island, and doing simple activities like fishing, collecting seashells, catching bugs, and maybe playing the turnip market to try and strike it rich. There are no end bosses, no frantic button mashing. You just take on the role of someone else living a much simpler existence. My kids have played hours and hours of it. Who am I kidding? So have I. The real world might have been going crazy, but the world in Animal Crossing was brighter, simpler, and easier to navigate. Properly done, role-playing games can also help broaden our appreciation and understanding of people much different than ourselves. True, this doesn't really apply when you're only playing an RPG to go out and slay some orcs and loot their bodies for treasure. In fact, many fantasy tropes can actually reinforce stereotypes when used incorrectly. But for people who really try to dig into their character and understand who they are and what motivates them, RPGs can be a way of viewing the world through new eyes. To back this up with some research, the American Journal of Clinical Hypnosis published a study in 2016 that indicated role players are significantly more likely to have empathic involvement with others. Maybe the solution to the QAnon crowd is to get them to play some Dungeons & Dragons instead. Dungeons & Dragons took the act of creation and placed it in the hands of masses. Now anyone could make their own fantasy adventure, and anyone could be the hero of the story. When you think of it, isn't that a trend that's been mirrored in many other ways over the last few decades? The internet began as a static place that was created by a select few and consumed by the rest of the world. Then it shifted back around to the early 2000s, and it turned into this spot that's much more about creating your own content and sharing it with the world than it is about just seeing what everyone else has said about something. Social media has taken over to the point that when I go looking at news articles about a topic, often a large part of those articles ends up being reports on what other people have said about the event on Twitter. I don't really understand how that's news, but I guess it must be since I keep clicking on it. In my defense, once they reach the "this is what other people said about this on Twitter" section of the article, I usually click my way elsewhere. Widely available video cameras and editing software, paired with platforms like YouTube and Vimeo, broke down the doors of filmmaking and made it so practically anyone could make a movie and share it with the world. Self-publishing has gone from the realm of vanity presses and ended up a completely viable way to get your books in front of readers, launching many successful authors' careers. You don't have to look anywhere further than The Martian. Andy Weir published it as a free serial on his website. Readers asked him to make a version available on Kindle. And then it hit the next level and ended up on the New York Times bestseller list, eventually being adapted into a movie that was nominated for 7 Oscars and won Golden Globes for Best Motion Picture and Best Actor. I would argue that most of the world these days has been turned from a lecture into a conversation. We no longer view ourselves as consumers, but as producers. Can all of it be traced back to Dungeons & Dragons? I might not be willing to go that far, but I'll say that the innovation came at a key moment in time. And I definitely believe many of the principles that made it so attractive to so many have ended up being used to do the same thing to countless other areas of technology and pop culture. So where might role-playing games go from here? I believe the future is brighter than ever for the platform. In fact, I see no chance that they do anything but become further entrenched. Take the plans of Disney World to add a Star Wars-themed hotel to their property. They're offering Star Wars-themed packages that promise people the chance to be completely immersed in all things Star Wars for 3 days, complete with missions and intricate plots. It'll cost you thousands of dollars, but you'll be able to be part of the Star Wars universe like never before. We've seen the same sort of thing happen with Harry Potter at Universal Studios, and I expect more of these efforts in the future. Media companies are savvy to the desire of fans to lose themselves in a work. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has made billions off the appeal of Uber fans to dive into the nuts and bolts of a film, to find all the Easter eggs and hidden clues that might lead them to more secrets. In fantasy, Brandon Sanderson created a sprawling Cosmere that has proven incredibly popular, tying together seemingly unconnected fantasy worlds into one universe. Each of these efforts is already using elements of role-playing games and augmented reality games, and science fiction has been predicting immersive virtual reality worlds for decades. I purchased the original Oculus Rift, and I just upgraded to the Quest 2 this past December. The original needed a $2,000 computer to function, as well as a bunch of extra cables and sensors. The new one only needs the controllers and the visor, and even the controllers are optional for some games. Knowing how successful World of Warcraft has been, I think we'll see a virtual reality equivalent of that in less than a decade. And all of this ignores the most glaring recent global changes incurred by the pandemic. When I think back on how much life in America changed after 9/11, I wonder what the repercussions of this global event will be in the years and decades to come. Many of them we can probably only guess at for now, but if nothing else, the sustained period of social distancing has accelerated the familiarity with using technology to interact with others from a distance, not just with message boards and social media, but with video calls and online gaming. I remember going to Epcot as a kid and seeing some of the portrayals of what life would be like in the future. It took COVID-19 for many of those portrayals to move closer to reality. But with role-playing games, it all comes down to one central kernel: the desire of people to be a part of the creative process, to own it in some way. In my opinion, it's the same thing that draws people to buy music and books, or, going back further, to have a player piano. Capturing something that was fleeting and used to be able to only be created by others, and instead creating it yourself. RPGs allow you to be the author or the composer if you're the DM, and even if you're just playing out a scenario someone else created, you still get to put your own stamp on it. That seems to be an innate desire shared across humanity, and thank goodness for it. Most of the things I love to do come from that single urge. Thanks for listening.